Are you interested in aviation? Are you a pilot looking for an adventure? Well, I would like to suggest building an airplane. In this video, I'm going to talk about what I built, home-built airplanes in general, how the FAA is involved, the Experimental Aircraft Association, and all the resources you have to build an aircraft. From there, I'd like to talk about the adventure of my build, the process of building, not just the nuts and bolts of building the aircraft, but all the things that go into it. From there, I'd like to talk about what I got out of it, both professional and personal, and I think by the end of the video you may be surprised at how it affects you, your family, and your kids in many beneficial ways. First, a little bit about me. I've been flying as a private pilot for over 25 years. I owned an Aeronca Champ with several other people. I owned a Cessna 170. I like to fly float planes. I've flown up in Maine, and I even have 20 hours of helicopter time. The aircraft I selected to build is called the Bear Hawk. I found through my flying I really enjoyed high-wing airplanes and flying to out-of-the-way places. The Bear Hawk is really well suited for that. It's a 4-seat aircraft, 260 horsepower, 2,500 pound gross weight. Carries 70 gallons of fuel. I can fly up to 840 miles, about 130 knot cruise speed. At its structural design gross weight, it's a utility category aircraft, so its load factor is a little higher than usual, which makes it a rugged machine. The fuselage is constructed of 4130 chrome moly steel tubing, same kind of tubing they use in NASCAR stock cars. The fuselage is covered in a fabric, Ceconite, which is very durable. The landing gear is a spring damper shock strut system, which gives it a good shock absorbing capability when landing on grass strips. The wings are aluminum. The control surfaces are also covered in fabric. The Bear Hawk is a short takeoff and landing airplane, or STOL. It has big flaps and great low-speed flying qualities. These are the qualities you want in an aircraft when you're flying into grass strips out in the backcountry. Here's a picture of the interior of my aircraft. I have a skylight in the top for great visibility looking up. The Bear Hawk has really large doors in the back, makes it really easy to get stuff in and out. I also added extra transparency for both the rear and the front seats. Since this is a plane I want to take all over North America, Canada, and Alaska, I want to be able to see as much as I can. It's proven to be just terrific for sightseeing. My aircraft's powered by a Lycoming IO540. It's a flat 6, fuel-injected, air-cooled piston engine. I've got a dual ignition system where I have one magneto and one electronic ignition. Here's a picture of my instrument panel. This is one place where builders can decide how they want to set it up to their own taste and how they want to fly. One touch I added to it is I veneered the panel in Alaskan yellow cedar, which makes for, I think, a really attractive panel. Here's all the instruments I have in the aircraft, your traditional airspeed altimeter, but I also have an EFIS system in it, which is really spectacular in terms of the information it can provide to the pilot. Standard audio panel, single NavCom, transponder. I have an engine information system, which is terrific because it gives me engine information in terms of temperatures, fuel flow, and all kinds of parameters on the aircraft's engine, which I can keep track of. I have a GPS, handheld GPS under the EFIS system, which acts as a backup. I also have a little system advisory panel in the lower left-hand side. I particularly like that because that is a 3D plastic printed part that my son made back when he was 14 years old. I asked him to make one for me. He designed it himself, and I added the lights, and now I have it in my aircraft. As I mentioned, I have an EFIS, Electronic Flight Information System. What was in airliners 10 or 15 years ago, you can now have in your aircraft for an absolute fraction of the cost. You can have synthetic vision, radar weather, topography, full engine information, all there right at your fingertips. It's just truly amazing what you can do with this now, all for any home-built aircraft you want to build. So that's what I built. I want to start talking about the adventure of building an aircraft. My adventure started the first time I said, "Hi, I'm going to build an airplane." It got more adventurous when I could say, "Hi, I'm building an airplane." And now I'm living the final phrase, "Hi, I built an airplane." I call these magic phrases, and as I go through this presentation, I'm going to show you how these magic phrases worked and how powerful they were. So when I started thinking about building an aircraft, I really wanted to find out what this whole home building thing was about, how many aircraft have been built, what resources are there, how does the FAA get involved. Just wanted to see what I was getting myself into if I wanted to do this. Well, the first thing I did was go to a big fly-in. I went to the Sun and Fun in Florida, which is held in mid-April. You can also go to Oshkosh in Wisconsin. Copper State Fly-In is also big, as well as Arlington. There are a number of fly-ins all around the country. These are great places to go see home-built aircraft and talk to people. What I found when I went down to Sun and Fun was the power of that first phrase. I'd be talking to people, either looking at an aircraft or at a desk of some manufacturer, some part, and I would say, "I'm going to build an airplane." And all of a sudden the attitudes changed. All of a sudden people said, "Hey, you're really into this. Let's talk." I learned all kinds of things about building aircraft, resources, where to go, what aircraft, how they fly, all kinds of things. Just amazing. Probably the most important thing I learned is that if you're going to build an aircraft, you really need to join EAA, the Experimental Aircraft Association. This is the organization for home-built airplanes. Tremendous number of resources there, both in terms of people, literature, videos, you name it. They're all about aviation, vintage aircraft, home-built aircraft, aerobatics, ultralights, you name it. The foundation of the EAA is in its chapters. There are about 1,000 chapters across the United States. There are also chapters internationally. The first thing I did when I got back from Sun & Fun was join a chapter. There I found other home builders, people just interested in aviation, now a tremendous resource available to me for building an aircraft, as well as choosing an aircraft in the first place. One of the first things I learned is how many home-built aircraft have built since 1953 when the EAA started collecting information on home-built aircraft. Over 30,000 have been built and flown in the United States, a large number by any count. There's a whole industry as well as regulations wrapped around building an experimental aircraft. Primarily, if you're going to build an aircraft, it's for your own education and recreation, and the FAA has a number of rules and regulations about building aircraft. But they also have a bunch of advisory circulars about building aircraft, things that can help you build it, repair it, and keep it maintained. You can scratch build an aircraft, but today most planes are built from kits. To qualify as an experimental or amateur built aircraft, you have to build at least 51% of it. There are a lot of kits out there that are reviewed by the FAA and they qualify for the 51% rule. One thing I was concerned about when I started building my airplane was, am I going to be able to get enough parts for it, buy things I need such as wheels and brakes and all that. There are many manufacturers out there for every kind of part you can imagine for your aircraft. So if you need it, it's out there and you're going to be able to find it. I think one of the most intimidating things that people think about when they want to build an aircraft is, are they going to be able to do it? Am I going to be able to find help? Well, there is lots of help out there. Workmanship, countless manuals on that, classes and workshops, and there are lots of helpful people out there, especially through the EAA. A number of publications, both from the FAA, EAA, and other organizations that publish information that will really help you get the aircraft all the way to completion. All aircraft were eventually inspected by the FAA. A designated airworthiness representative or an FAA inspector will come out to look at your aircraft before first flight. It used to be in the old days you'd have interim inspections, not required anymore, but it's a good idea to have other people that have built aircraft come take a look. You'll learn a lot of hints about how to get things into a good condition for flight, and overall it's also actually a great way to share information and have fun building aircraft. When you're done, you've got an aircraft that's legally certified by the FAA. You've got the same rights and obligations as other aircraft. You can fly wherever any factory aircraft can go, but you also have to regularly maintain the aircraft, do an annual inspection, just again as any other aircraft would be. Can't use it for any commercial transport. It's not the purpose of experimental amateur built. And you are able to get insurance. A number of insurance companies out there will insure aircraft just like, again, any factory built aircraft. Whether you're thinking about building an airplane or not, but you like airplanes, go to AirVenture in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, last week in July each year. Typically 750,000 people, 10,000 airplanes, an air show every day. Home-built airplanes, factory-built, many vendors, warbirds flying. It's really quite a show. It'll take you 3 days just to get through everything one time. Really quite an event. I'd like to get back to a little bit about my adventure. Remember those magic phrases, hi, I'm going to build an airplane, or I'm building an airplane? Look at all the aircraft on this slide here. I got a free ride and stick time in every one of these aircraft because I told someone I was building an airplane, and they wanted to show me their airplane and help me choose the plane I wanted to build, learn about pieces and things I could do with my plane. With the exception of the B-17. No stick time in that, but I did get to ride in it twice. This is one of my favorite examples of how powerful those phrases are. This is Lake Hood, Alaska. I was able to get a ride in a PA-14. I made the connection through my wife's college roommate's husband's cousin's friend. I was able to arrange this ride through a series of emails and texts as I was flying from Connecticut to Alaska on the layovers. And when we got there, he said, come on, let's go for a ride. Looking forward to it. Want to hear about your kit. My building adventure started in the June of 2006. Here's how the kit came, all wrapped up on the back of a trailer. Here's a picture of the Bearhawk kit. The kit is very complete in terms of the airframe. I was still responsible for going out and buying all the systems that go in the aircraft, the engine-related items, wheels, brakes, and all that sort of thing. But I was able to tailor the kit to the way I wanted to build it. One thing you'll find if you're building an airplane is logistics planning. The first thing I had to do is make sure I could get it into my basement. My basement was about 4 inches too narrow coming down the Bilco doors, So I actually had to go do measurements, figure out how much to take off, and I was just barely able to make it in, but it all worked out in the end. Just about all kits today come with a manual. They tell you where to start. You have some choices in that matter. I decided to do the wings first, and then I went into the fuselage and all the parts and systems on the fuselage. Generally, the fuselage takes you longer because there are more parts that go in it, more plumbing, more wiring, and all that sort of thing. But you do have manuals in almost all the kits today, so you're not left alone out there. There are also a number of service bulletins that come out for a number of manufacturers that keep track of any changes in the kits. That's also a great thing. Working away, my wife always knew where to find me. I had great fun building the plane, learning how things go together, learning all my metalworking skills. Here's a picture of my wing. The Bearhawk wings come partially assembled. The upper skin is left unriveted, so you can get in there and put in the fuel tanks, the plumbing, the wiring, whatever you need to do. You do have to put in a number of nut plates, 100 on either side for the fuel tank, but it does save you an awful lot of time. The other great thing about prefab wings is you don't have to build any jigs. The wing is all nice and rigid, and you can build it right on a table. So it saves you a lot of time and also saves you some space. Here's a picture of my wife helping me rivet parts on an aileron. I think by the time I finished my kit, everybody in the family learned how to rivet pretty well. You also learn about how to fit fiberglass parts to metal, working with fiberglass. Some people make their own fiberglass parts if you're into that. Here's kind of an unusual picture. One thing you do as you build your aircraft is you always check your work. In this case, I'm checking the plumbing system. It's really simple. All you do is blow up a balloon at either end, put it on, let it sit overnight. You come back, the balloon still has pressure in it. You have no leaks in your system. So something you do when you're building an aircraft is always checking your work as you go through, because you get to one point and you close things up and you may not be able to check it out again. Back to some of the logistics of building an aircraft. I had finished up my wings, put them over on the side of the basement, and I realized it was time to get the fuselage downstairs. I realized it may not fit vertically, so I had to come up with a way to make sure it was going to go in there, or I was going to have to go to my backup plane, which was go in the garage. So I got my kids together, and we made an outline of the airframe using just PVC tubing. Put it all around the fuselage, then screwed it together, made a profile model of the fuselage, and then checked it, and sure enough, it looks like we barely had enough room. So I got the kids to help me with that. And then on the next chart, you see us actually getting the aircraft into the basement. My friend in the back there is 6'4". It's nice to have tall friends sometimes. And you can see I just barely made it in. But the math worked, and it got it in. And next thing you know, I've got an aircraft in the basement, and the basement got real small. Something just about every home builder has to do is figure out what engine they want to put in the aircraft and where they're going to get it. My plan had been to go find an engine that was in an aircraft or had been recently overhauled. I got a call one day from a friend that said, "Mark, your engine's up in New Hampshire." Through a series of connections, I found out this Marchetti 260, its engine was just about ready for overhaul, was still in flying condition, and I was able to get up there with my friend, flew up to a private airport, talked to the guy. We both got a ride the Marchetti 260 and made a deal on the engine. It was a really fun day. It's just one of those adventures you get when you're building an aircraft. You never know who you're going to meet and where you're going to find certain things. I needed to get the engine into the basement so I could put it on the aircraft and do all my engine-related items, everything on the firewall, get it all set up. And the engine weighs close to 400 pounds. And you notice the title of this slide is not getting an engine in the basement. It's called Making Another Withdrawal from the Favor Bank. You need friends. I needed 5 other people to help me get this into the basement, and I really had no trouble because I had helped fill the favor bank by doing favors for them. So one thing to keep in mind, it's a kind of a community effort at times, and that's also what makes it fun. You may notice in the upper left-hand corner there's a mock-up of bringing the engine down in the basement, but instead of the engine, I had concrete blocks in milk crates. Got it to about the same weight because we really wanted to see if we were going to be able to get it down without getting anybody hurt and making sure nothing was going to slide off. So sometimes you got to be a little creative with some prototyping. Here's a picture of working away on the firewall, getting a lot of holes in there so I could run all my wires and fuel lines through the firewall. Like I said before, the basement got real small. I had 1-inch clearance between the top of the fuselage and my lights, just barely fit. Another picture of the fuselage as it's coming together. I did put in enlarged windows and transparencies, which I really like in the aircraft. Here's a picture of that assembly process. Working away here on the cowl, sometimes you find creative ways to get access and get comfortable while you're working. I also decided to give fiberglassing a try. I made my own custom air scoop on the bottom. I think it came out really well. It was a lot of work for me, and I realized I really enjoyed the metalworking more than the fiberglass, but everybody's got their own preferences, and the only way you know is to give it a shot. Every now and then I'd get a visit from the teenage conehead inspector. One thing I knew I was going to have to learn how to do was wire my aircraft. I did not have a lot of experience up to that point, but here is a diagram I actually put together for the whole power distribution. I just read the books and talked to people, and next thing I knew, I had a complete wiring system all set up and ready to go. Here's a picture of the wiring about halfway through. It looks pretty complicated, but it really is not. You just lay in one wire at a time, go by your plan. When you're all done, you neaten it up, put a bunch of tie wraps on it, get things orderly, and since I've completed this, I've had no problems with electrical, and looking back, it's actually one of the most fun things I did on the aircraft. Now, sometimes you may decide you need some help actually constructing part of the aircraft. I decided to make some modifications to the airframe, part of the windows that I talked about earlier, but I wanted to put on float fittings. I knew this was going to require some welding. I had an EAA chapter buddy who was really good at welding, and I had him come over and said, tell you what, how about you do a little welding on here and you can teach me at the same time. And he came over and we had a great time going through and figuring out how to put on these parts. So the whole time I was building the aircraft and people knew I was building it, they'd say, well, I want to come over and see it. I want to see how you're doing. Well, I had so many requests, I just decided to have an open house. That was in 2008. I was expecting maybe 10 or 15 people to come over. Well, 55 people showed up, and I ran out of food and coffee, and it ended up being a terrific afternoon. People got to see what I was doing, talk about it. It was just a great little event. If you're building an airplane, I recommend you do it. It's a lot of fun. Here's another picture showing what kind of little adventures you end up having while you build an airplane. I got a 3-bladed propeller. That's the reason for the funny-looking box, and funny-looking boxes don't fit in doorways too easily, and we got it stuck. So we kind of laughed about it and eventually figured out a way to get it through the door. By this time, I was moving along pretty well. I did end up taking the wings and putting them vertical because I wanted to put in aux tanks, and I found the best way to work on it was to actually put them on 2x4s strung from the ceiling down to the floor. I also put in landing lights on the tips. I call this cutting big holes in expensive wings, so you have to learn to make sure you plan things out right, do things carefully, work your way through, make sure you're not going to damage anything. I did make some modifications of the Bearhawk and the flight controls for the ailerons. I decided to put in some flaperons, which are working out pretty well. But I had to do some load testing. So again, I got the help upstairs to come down and do some pulling and some measuring, and everything worked out really well. One of the big days for an airplane is when it kind of comes out of the basement and is ready to go to the garage, in my case, to get covered. So I call this the birthing of an airplane, and it really seemed like that. My wife said, hey, the house is giving birth. And so again, I traded in some favors and got some friends over, and we pulled it on out. I covered the fuselage in the garage. I covered the smaller parts in the basement. My wife's pretty good at fabric, so she helped me out putting the big pieces of fabric on the fuselage. And this was also a case where I get my dad involved in building the airplane. He had always wanted to, and this was a case where he could do some rib stitching for me, and he had a great time doing that. All during the construction of the aircraft, I was playing with various paint schemes for the aircraft. What I ended up doing is coming up with some paint schemes of different colors and designs. And then I sent pictures like this out to people and say, hey, what do you like? What would you like to change? And eventually it was a hodgepodge of friends and family giving me suggestions. And this is what I eventually came up with, which I like and I've gotten a lot of compliments on. Here's a picture of some of the painting process, a bunch of pieces hanging up in the garage. I found that if you took parts out into the sunlight, all the little imperfections that you see under the fluorescent lights tend to disappear. You can really go crazy trying to do a perfect job, but I got one that came out pretty well. What's interesting is I had never picked up a spray gun before I started this project. And through practice and reading instructions, eventually I got to the point where I really liked it, and it came out pretty well. Another big day in the life of a home-built airplane is when it leaves home and heads to the airport. So I was able to get a friend with a truck and trailer. You really need friends with trucks and trailers sometimes. And brought it out to the airport. Again, kind of a social event. Had a bunch of people help me put it on there. They're all willing to help. Really wanted to see it get there. And at the hangar, I did all my final assembly. Now, as I talked about before, is you have to do a whole bunch of checks as you're building the aircraft. And these are covered in many manuals and documents and instructions you can get. But electrical, fuel flow, usable fuel, axle alignment, all kinds of things you do in preparation for first flight. So as you go through these things methodically, when you're all done, you're going to be the guy on the right and not the guy on the left when it comes time for first flight. Here's a picture of the aircraft undergoing fuel system testing. You test the aircraft at a most nose-up attitude as well as a slightly nose-down attitude. This ensures that the engine gets fuel flow at any time in the aircraft envelope. A big event in the building of an aircraft is first engine start. This is a good time to have people come out and watch the aircraft come to life. It was a kind of a cold day, but I had my son in the right seat, and it started right up and ran it for a little bit, and it was really quite an event. By this time, the plane was ready to go, but I had to make sure the pilot, me, was ready to go. I wanted to do the first flight in the aircraft. So the most important thing was to maintain flight currency, but I also wanted to make sure I had a good idea of what the Bearhawk characteristics were going to be like. So I went out and flew in a Bearhawk with a friend up in Vermont. I also got some time in a mall, make sure I was all set for the landing attitude and the higher performance that I was going to see in my aircraft. And then I flew several times in the week prior to my first flight. First flight day is probably the biggest day when you're building an aircraft, and there are a lot of things to get ready. You keep a running checklist, and you can see the whole list of things that I did getting ready for the flight. It was a beautiful, calm morning in May. I had my flight advisor there, as well as just a few people I really wanted to have there for the first flight. Really not a good thing to have a big crowd there because they're all anticipating, because you really got to make sure everything's right. You don't want to disappoint anybody if you're not going to go. Overall, it worked out really well. I was a little nervous, but the ground crew was not nervous. As you can see here, they were having a grand old time while I was up there for an hour or so. And the big thing, of course, is when you're all done and you land and people come around and ask you how it is, well, just overall, it's a day to remember. So you've gotten a pretty good overview of my adventure here, but I want to talk about the benefits. I like adventures, and I like the stories that go with them, and I have lots of stories that go with building this aircraft, and I can share them with other people. I can talk to other people who have built aircraft, and they've got very similar stories, and it's just great to share those with them. And that being the case, you feel like you're part of a fraternity. I've got friendships that I've made through building the aircraft, through EAA, and even at work, people have asked me a lot about them. We've become friends there. I've got places to stay across the country now. In the upper right-hand corner there is the Bearhawk Hotel map. Bearhawk builders all across the country, even Alaska. If you're traveling across the country, you've probably got a place to stay, and these are people willing to put you up. There's just the fun of having something unique. Here's a picture of my aircraft at a fly-in. I had people coming up to it all the time because it was different. It had all this glass in it. It was a tail dragger. It just looked different, and there's a lot of fun in that. And the pride of building that goes with that. Sharing experiences and knowledge with other people about the aircraft, as well as other builders also, as I help them. And of course, I talked about the power of the phrases. Well, I get rides in cool airplanes, and that's another side benefit. You can trade rides and experience other aircraft. So we've talked about building the aircraft, but it's not just the building. If you look at the first two bullets, metalworking, wiring, fiberglassing, all that, yeah, we talked about that. But I hope you saw some of the other things there. Cost and performance assessments, learning how to shop well, rapid prototyping, human factors, cost and schedule assessments, logistics planning. Did you catch all that? There's a lot that goes into building the aircraft, and it makes it an adventure. But here's the thing. You learn how to do that building an aircraft, and I guarantee you, you can apply it to your job. It's really beneficial. I can't tell you how many times in my job I have remembered back to doing something on my aircraft, either logistics or actually working on aircraft, and it has helped me in what I do as a profession. Now, there was something else going on while I was building the aircraft, and I call that my hidden agenda. So when I started this, I had another plan for these two guys right here. I think you recognize them going through all my adventure here. Those are my two boys, and I built the plane when they were teenagers. Let me ask you something. What would you pay to have your kids believe they can do big things? Probably a lot, both in time and money, something we all want for our kids. Well, I thought if they could see their dad doing something as outrageous as building an airplane in the basement, then when they grew up, they could say, well, you know what, I can do big things too. I saw my dad do it. I saw him successfully complete it. Maybe I could do something like that too. And that's one way of getting your kids to believe they can do big things. Well, it didn't quite work out that way. So like I said, I was hoping when they got older, they would help them out. Well, they started early. This is a picture of my son when he was 15 years old, just a couple years after I started building my plane. He decided he wanted to make an F-18 cockpit replica and put it in his bedroom. He started flying online combat simulations, kind of like these red flag exercises, very realistic stuff. And he was actually flying with a squadron. He actually started out learning from these people and eventually became an instructor, the youngest instructor in the group. He set up a monitor on top of his cockpit glare shield, hooked up switches to the computer through the dash panel here, and ended up making really a pretty cool thing here. So what happened with that? Well, he put that on his college resume. He ended up going to WPI, majoring in aerospace engineering, got himself 2 summer internships at Sikorsky, and now he's got a full-time job there in the High-End Qualities Group. My younger son decided he wanted to make a tilt-wing remote control aircraft. This is a picture of the aircraft he built from scratch. He bought the rotor systems from regular RC helicopter supply houses and built the wing and built the fuselage and actually made the blades and wired the whole thing together and really came up with a really cool, unique aircraft, which he's just starting to fly now. So how did that work out? Well, that got him into Clarkson University, also aerospace engineering, and now he's in his 3rd summer internship at Sikorsky. So when you do something big, watch out. You turn around and your kids may decide they want to do something big and do it early. Remember this chart, the education? You can apply it to your job. Well, my kids experienced that because around the dinner table, talking about things, they saw this, heard this, and experienced this a little bit every day. And they applied it to what they wanted to do, and they applied it to school. So it really rubs off. So I'm going to wrap things up here. And a few things I want to leave you with is that if you want to build an airplane, you do have to like to build. That is kind of what it's about. You're going to spend a lot of time building the aircraft and maybe even more than you fly it. But if you like the adventure and you like the challenge and you like to do things with your hands, you probably won't find a more fun project. Remember, there are lots of resources out there. You're not going to go it alone. People, publications, the internet is wonderful. Don't worry about that. And remember, it's not what it costs, it's what you get out of it. I had my story agenda, my adventure agenda, and I had my hidden agenda, which is probably even more important to me. But if you make an effort to share your adventure with your friends and family, I guarantee it will enrich your professional, personal, and family life. So keep that in mind if you want to go build an aircraft. To learn more about starting your home-built airplane adventure, visit eaa.org. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it.